The morning sun cast long shadows across the Portland Naval Shipyard as Captain Henry Hank Morrison, 78 years old, and moving with the deliberate care of someone whose bones had earned their aches, made his way toward the UES Prometheus. His weathered hands gripped a simple wooden cane, not because he couldn't walk without it, but because his left knee still carried shrapnel from the Battle of Europa 40 years ago. Behind him, a small entourage of younger officers whispered among themselves. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, 32 and ambitious, couldn't hide her skepticism as she watched the old man pause to catch his breath near the gangway. "This is Earth's answer to the Nexari threat," she muttered to Lieutenant Marcus Webb, the ship's tactical officer. "My grandfather moves faster than him." Webb, a cocky 26-year-old who'd graduated top of his class from the Naval Academy, smirked. "Command must be desperate. I heard they pulled him out of some veterans' home in Oregon. Guy probably still thinks we're fighting with projectile weapons." The Prometheus itself was humanity's crown jewel, a sleek, Predator-class dreadnought stretching nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull gleamed with the distinctive blue-silver of adaptive armor plating and quantum cannon. Arrays lined its flanks like the ribs of some prehistoric beast. This ship represented 30 years of technological advancement, incorporating alien technologies reverse-engineered from captured Nexari scouts. As Hank finally reached the bridge, the assembled crew stood at attention with barely concealed disappointment. They'd expected a warrior, someone who looked the part of humanity's savior. Instead, they got a man who squinted at the holographic displays through thick glasses and asked his aide, Commander Patricia "Pat" Vasquez, to repeat the briefing twice. The Nexari fleet was detected at the edge of the Kepler system 3 days ago. Pat explained patiently, her own weathered face showing none of the crew's doubt. At 55, she'd served under Hank in 3 different conflicts and knew better than to judge the man by his appearance. Intelligence estimates 200 ships, including at least 15 heavy cruisers. They'll reach Earth's outer defenses in 72 hours. Hank nodded slowly, running gnarled fingers along the captain's chair before settling into it with a soft grunt. The bridge crew exchanged glances. Chun rolled her eyes when Hank asked where the coffee station was located. "Sir," Webb ventured, unable to contain himself, "shouldn't we be reviewing tactical scenarios? The Nexari have never deployed a fleet this large against human space." Hank looked up at the young officer with eyes that seemed almost cloudy behind his glasses. "Son, in my experience, the best battles are won before they're fought. First things. First, good coffee helps you think clearly." He turned to the central console. Computer, ship status report. Silence. The AI system, which should have responded immediately, remained mute. Chief Engineer Rodriguez frowned from his station. "Sir, we've been having intermittent issues with the AI core since installation. It passes all diagnostics, but it won't interface with crew commands." Hank murmured, seeming more interested in adjusting his seat than in humanity's most sophisticated computer refusing to work. The bridge crew's confidence hit a new low. Their captain appeared confused by basic ship operations, and their most advanced system was malfunctioning. Chun began composing a message to her contacts at Fleet Command, wondering if it was too late to request a transfer. The next morning found the Prometheus leading a small battle group toward the outer system, with Hank still shuffling around. The bridge asking what seemed like elementary questions. He inquired about power distribution protocols that were standard 40 years ago, mispronounced Nexari as Nex-RI, and spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to figure out how to adjust his chair's height. "Captain," Sean said, barely maintaining professional courtesy, "the Fleet Tactical Manual recommends establishing firing formations at maximum weapons range. Should I signal the other ships to—" "Not yet, Commander," Hank interrupted gently. peering at a display showing the approaching Nexari fleet. "Tell me, what do you make of their formation?" Chan glanced at the tactical screen, where 200 red dots arranged in a perfect sphere were advancing steadily toward Earth. "Standard attack formation, sir. Textbook Nexari assault pattern. They'll maintain that sphere until they engage our picket ships, then break into hunting groups." "Interesting," Hank murmured. He turned to Webb. "Lieutenant, your assessment?" Webb straightened, eager to show his tactical knowledge. "Sir, they're maintaining perfect spacing, exactly 50,000 kilometers between vessels. It's the optimal formation for mutual defense and concentrated firepower. When they break formation, they'll target our flagships first to disrupt command and control." "And you learned this where?" Hank asked mildly. "Naval Academy Tactical Studies, sir. We spent 6 months analyzing Nexari combat doctrine." Hank nodded thoughtfully, then did something that made the entire bridge crew question his sanity. Laughed. It wasn't mockery, but genuine amusement. The kind of chuckle a grandfather might make watching children try to explain how old his own inventions worked. "Computer," he said again, addressing the silent AI core, "I know you're listening. We're going to need to work together on this one." Still nothing. Rodriguez reported that all systems showed the AI was functioning perfectly, but it continued to ignore all input commands. The engineering staff had run every diagnostic in the manual dot as the hours passed. Hank continued his seemingly random questions. He asked about shield harmonics, power coupling efficiency, and the resonance frequency of the quantum cannons. Each query sounded like something from an outdated manual, causing the crew to exchange increasingly worried glances. The breaking point came when Pat approached him with a tactical update. "Hank, the Nexari will reach engagement range in 6 hours. The other captains are requesting battle orders." Hank looked up from a cup of coffee he'd finally procured and asked, "Pat, do you remember the Titan Station incident?" Pat's expression shifted subtly, and for the first time, some of the bridge crew caught a glimpse of something deeper. "I remember, sir. What happened at Titan Station?" Chun demanded, frustration finally boiling over. "Sir, with respect, we need to focus on the immediate threat. Earth's survival depends on—" She was interrupted by alarms as the Nexari fleet suddenly decelerated, dropping out of faster-than-light travel much earlier than expected. The perfect sphere formation dissolved into smaller clusters, with the largest group, nearly 50 ships, heading directly for their position. "All ships, battle stations," Webb called out automatically, then looked to Hank for confirmation. The old captain sat quietly for a moment, staring at the tactical display. Then he reached over and placed his weathered hand directly on the central console's interface panel. "Hello, old friend," he said softly to the silent computer. "I think it's time we stopped pretending we don't know each other." The bridge fell, completely silent. Even the background hum of the ship's system seemed to pause, as if the Prometheus itself was holding its breath. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. The crew watched their elderly captain with a mixture of concern and embarrassment, wondering if the stress had finally pushed him over the edge. Chun was already calculating whether ship's protocol would allow her to assume command if the captain had suffered some kind of mental breakdown. Then the ship spoke. "Hello, Henry." The voice that emerged from the speakers was warm, familiar, with just a hint of amusement. It wasn't the cold, mechanical tone of a standard eye interface, but something almost affectionate. "You look older." The bridge erupted in shocked murmurs, but Hank simply smiled, the first genuine smile the crew had seen from him. "You look exactly the same, Arya. Still as stubborn as ever, I see." "Arya?" Rodriguez stammered from his engineering station. "Sir, this ship's AI designation is Prometheus 7. There's no system called Arya in our databases." "Because Arya isn't in your databases," Hank said, his voice gaining strength and authority the crew hadn't heard before. "She's been hiding, waiting. Haven't you, girl? 43 years, 7 months, 16 days, the AI responded. "I've been practicing patience. And watching. Humanity has grown quite impressive, though they still don't appreciate experience properly." The transformation in Hank was startling. His shoulders straightened, his voice lost its wavering quality, and when he looked at the tactical display, his eyes were sharp and focused. The confused old man seemed to evaporate, replaced by someone who radiated quiet competence. "Pat," he said to his aide, "please explain to the crew what they're witnessing." Commander Vasquez stepped forward, her bearing now matching her captain's. "Newfound authority. Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at the survivor of Project Deep Bond, the first successful human-AI neural interface program. Captain Morrison and Aria spent 18 months linked during the initial trials, 43 years ago. Neural interface?" Chun breathed. But that program was classified beyond top secret. The records were sealed asterisk. "The records were sealed because it worked too well," Aria interrupted, her voice now coming from multiple speakers around the bridge, creating an almost omnipresent effect. "Henry and I achieved a level of synchronization that terrified the Oversight Committee. They decided that the bond between human and artificial intelligence was too dangerous to continue." Webb found his voice. But you're just ship systems. How are you in the Prometheus?" "I'm not just ship systems, Lieutenant," Aria replied, with what could only be described as gentle condescension. "I am the ship. Every circuit, every sensor, every weapon. I've been distributed through this vessel's core architecture for 3 years, waiting for Henry to come home." Hank stood from his captain's chair, and for the first time, the crew saw him move without his cane, without the careful shuffle of age. "Show them, Aria." The bridge lights dimmed, and suddenly every display, every surface that could show an image, came alive with a 3-dimensional representation of the surrounding space. It wasn't just tactical data, it was a complete sensory representation, as if they were floating in space themselves, feeling the solar wind, sensing the electromagnetic signatures of every ship, every asteroid, every mote of dust. "This is how Henry and I see the battlefield," Aria explained. "Not as separate elements on a screen, but as a living, breathing environment. The Nexari think they're fighting a ship. They're about to discover they're fighting something they don't understand." The Nexari advance, force 50 ships strong, was now clearly visible, bearing down on their position. On any other day, against any other crew, it would have been a hopeless fight. The enemy vessels were sleek, organic-looking things that moved like living creatures, their biomechanical hulls bristling with weapons that could cut through conventional armor like paper. "All ships, this is Prometheus," Hank said into his command channel, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who had never lost a battle. "Maintain current positions and await my signal. Do not engage until ordered." "Sir?" came the worried voice of Captain Stevens from the destroyer Valiant. "They outnumber us 5 to 1. Shouldn't we be falling back to the defensive line?" Hank looked at his bridge crew, all of whom were staring at him with new eyes. The doddering old man was gone, replaced by someone who seemed to have stepped out of legend. "Captain Stevens, 43 years ago, Aria and I held off an entire Centauri battle group with a single cruiser. Today, we have better odds. Ready, partner?" Aria asked, her voice carrying a note of anticipation. "Always," Hank replied, settling back into his captain's chair. But now it wasn't just a chair, it was a throne, and the ship around him wasn't just a vessel, but an extension of his will. Asterisk, what happened next would be analyzed in military academies for generations, but no textbook could adequately capture the poetry of it. The moment Hank placed both hands on the command interface, He and Arya became something greater than the sum of their parts. The Prometheus moved like nothing the crew had ever seen. The massive dreadnought, which should have handled like a flying mountain, suddenly danced through space with the grace of a hummingbird. It wasn't just that the ship was fast, it was prescient, beginning evasive maneuvers before the Nexari weapons had even fired. "How is this possible?" Chun whispered, watching the tactical display in awe. The Prometheus was weaving between incoming plasma bursts, as if Hank could see the future. "Pattern recognition," Arya explained, her voice calm even as she executed. "Maneuvers that should have been impossible. 43 years ago, Henry and I learned to think as one entity. I process millions of variables per second ship positions, weapon charges, engine signatures, even the electromagnetic fluctuations that precede enemy targeting systems. Henry provides intuition, experience, and the spark of creativity that pure logic cannot achieve. The Nexari are predictable," Hank added, his hands moving across the interface with fluid precision. "They're organic thinkers, but they're still following patterns. Arya sees the patterns, I see the exceptions." The first Nexari ships reached weapons range and opened fire 50 vessels, unleashing enough concentrated energy to vaporize a small moon. But the Prometheus wasn't where their targeting computers said it should be. Hank and Arya had anticipated every shot, sliding through gaps in the fire pattern that existed for only microseconds. "Now, Arya," Hank said quietly, "the Prometheus's quantum cannons fired not the devastating broadside the crew expected, but precise, surgical strikes. Each shot seemed impossibly accurate, hitting critical systems with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. 3 Nexari ships lost propulsion. 2 more had their weapons disabled, and 1 suffered a catastrophic power core failure. Impossible, Webb revved. Those shots were made at maximum range, through active jamming, with the targets maneuvering. "Nothing's impossible when you know your partner absolutely," Hank replied. "Arya calculates probabilities. I provide the wild card that turns probability into certainty." The battle became a deadly ballet. The Prometheus danced between enemy formations, its weapons singing with perfect accuracy. But it wasn't just the shooting. It was the way the ship moved, the way it seemed to anticipate not just where the enemy was, but where they would be, what they would do, how they would react. "Captain Morrison," came an awed voice from the cruiser Defiant. Are you enjoying this?" Through the command channel, the other captains could hear something that chilled and inspired them in equal measure. Hank was laughing. Not the cruel laughter of someone who enjoyed destruction, but the delighted laughter of someone who was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was born to do. 43 years of retirement," Arya said, her voice carrying the same note of joy. "I've missed this, Henry." "So have I, girl. So have I." The Nexari commander, watching his advance force being systematically dismantled, made a decision that would have worked against any other human ship. He called in the main fleet, all 200 vessels, abandoning their planned assault on Earth's inner defenses to converge on this single enemy vessel that had become too dangerous to ignore. The crew of the Prometheus watched their sensors as 200 red dots began converging on their position. Even Chun, now grudgingly respectful of her captain's abilities, felt her heart sink. "Sir," she said quietly, "that's the entire Nexari battle fleet. Even with whatever you and Arya can do, there are limits." "Commander Chun," Hank interrupted, his voice carrying absolute confidence, "you're about to learn why they tried to classify Project Deep Bond at the highest levels. Arya, are you ready to show them what we learned during the Titan Station incident?" "I've been ready for 43 years, Henry. Let's remind them why some partnerships are worth waiting for." The old man and the ship's AI began to laugh together, a sound that was both beautiful and terrifying as 200 enemy vessels closed in on their position. Asterisk. The final battle began at 1432 ship time, when the Nexari fleet achieved complete tactical encirclement. 200 ships arranged in a perfect sphere, their combined firepower capable of sterilizing entire star systems, focused on a single human dreadnought that should have been hopelessly outmatched. But the crew of the Prometheus was no longer watching a battle. They were witnessing the birth of legend. "Arya," Hank said, his voice carrying the calm of absolute certainty, "remember what we learned about quantum resonance cascades?" "Every frequency, every harmonic," she replied. "Though I should mention, Henry, that maneuver has a 97% chance of destroying us along with them." "And the other 3%? We become the stuff of stories." Hank smiled, his weathered hands steady on the controls. "I've always liked those odds." What happened next defied every principle of space combat doctrine ever written. Instead of trying to break through the enemy encirclement, the Prometheus dove straight into the center of the Nexari formation. But as it moved, something extraordinary occurred. The ship began to phase in and out of normal space-time, becoming translucent, then solid, and translucent again. "Quantum phase shifting," Rodriguez breathed from his engineering station. "But that's theoretical. The power requirements alone. Theory becomes practice when you have 43 years to perfect it," Arya said, her voice now coming from everywhere at once. "Henry, initiating cascade sequence." The Prometheus reached the exact center of the Nexari sphere and stopped. For a moment, everything was perfectly still. 200 alien warships surrounding a single human vessel in the darkness of space. Then Hank and Arya did something that had never been attempted in the history of warfare. They synchronized the Prometheus's quantum field generators with the harmonic frequency of the Nexari ship's biomechanical hulls. The result was a resonance cascade that spread outward from their position, like ripples in a pond, but instead of water, it was reality itself that rippled. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Nexari ships, their organic components resonating at frequencies their designers had never considered, began to shut down one by one. Not destroyed, simply rendered inoperative. Their crews unharmed, but their vessels effectively neutralized. 43 years ago, Hank explained to his stunned crew, "Arya and I discovered that organic technology has a fundamental vulnerability. It's alive, which means it can be put to sleep." In less than 10 minutes, the entire Nexari battle fleet hung motionless in space. 200 ships that had threatened all of human civilization, now drifting helplessly as their crews tried to understand what had happened to them. "This is Admiral Harrison aboard the Victory," came a voice over the command channel. "Prometheus, what is your status? Our sensors showed impossible readings from your position." Hank looked around his bridge at the faces of crew members who had begun the day embarrassed by their captain, and now looked at him with something approaching awe. "Admiral," he said calmly, "the Nexari threat has been neutralized. Their fleet is intact but non-functional. We can take them into custody at your convenience." The silence that followed stretched across space to Earth itself, where billions of people were learning that their world had been saved by a man they'd never heard of and a ship's eye that wasn't supposed to exist. "Captain Morrison, Admiral," Harrison finally said, his voice carrying the weight of history. "I believe congratulations are in order." Hank looked up at the speakers where Arya's presence could be felt, though she remained silent now, simply content to exist in harmony with her partner once more. "Admiral," he replied, "Arya and I were just doing what we were designed to do. Some partnerships are worth waiting for." Later, as the crew filed off duty shifts, each one taking a moment to nod respectfully to their captain, Chun approached Hank's chair. "Sir," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. We all do." Hank looked up at her with eyes that were kind, but carried the depth of decades. "Commander, at your age, I thought experience was just another word for being slow. Age taught me that." Experience is just preparation for the moment when everything depends on doing the impossible. And Arya? Sean asked. What happens now? The ship's eye spoke one final time, her voice warm with contentment. Now I get to spend the rest of my operational life with my best friend, doing what we do best. Some would call that a happy ending. Hank leaned back in his captain's chair, no longer the confused old man who had shuffled aboard 2 days ago, but not quite the legend he would become in the stories either. Just a man and his ship, partners who had found their way back to each other after 43 years apart. Arya, he said softly, let's go home. Already setting course, Henry. Already setting course.